I am Jeremiah, 32 years old, and I was nearly murdered by a hitman hired by my own brother, with my parents' full blessing. Before I tell you about the explosive truth that sent him to prison and completely destroyed my toxic family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The air in Hilton Head, South Carolina, was thick with humidity and the smell of expensive sunscreen. It was late September, the kind of beautiful evening that felt like it belonged in a travel brochure. I was sitting on a sunlit balcony of a luxury resort, watching the waves crash against the shore. Down below, my mother was laughing at something my older brother, Dean, had just said. My father was holding a drink, smiling. They looked like the perfect American family enjoying a hard-earned vacation. I was up there alone, holding a glass of ice water, trying to convince myself that this reunion was real. It had been 21 years since I last spent any real time with them. 21 years of total silence. Yet here I was, paying for a portion of this trip, trying to play the role of the returning prodigal son because my mother had called me weeping, claiming she had early-stage cancer and wanted to mend fences before it was too late. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, expecting an email from my lead developer in San Francisco. Instead, it was a text message from an unknown number. No name, no contact info. Fly home. Don't say anything to your parents and brother. Get out now. I stared at the screen. The glare of the setting sun made it hard to read, but the words did not change. My thumb hovered over the screen. I almost deleted it, thinking it was some kind of elaborate spam or a wrong number, but a cold knot formed in the pit of my stomach. I looked down at the courtyard again. Dean was looking up at my balcony. When he saw me looking, his smile vanished. His jaw tightened, and he quickly looked away, saying something low to my father. My instincts, honed from years of surviving on my own and building a tech company from the ground up, screamed at me. I stepped back into my hotel room and closed the sliding glass door. I did not pack my suitcase. I did not fold my shirts. I grabbed my laptop, my passport, and stuffed them into my backpack. I left my clothes hanging in the closet. I left my toothbrush on the bathroom counter. I walked out of the room, taking the service stairs down to the lobby instead of the elevator. I ordered a car to the Savannah/Hilton Head International Airport. Sitting in the back of that car, watching the Spanish moss hanging from the oak trees fade into the darkness, I kept my phone turned off. I did not want to see their messages. I did not want to hear their voices. 14 hours later, I was walking through the arrivals terminal at Bradley International Airport in Hartford, Connecticut. My eyes burned from lack of sleep. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, annoying hum. I adjusted the strap of my backpack, planning to grab a cab to my apartment, lock the door, and sleep for 2 days straight. But as I approached the baggage claim, I saw a man holding a white placard with my name printed in bold black letters. Jeremiah Frell. He was an older man, dressed in a sharp gray suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his posture was rigid. He did not look like a chauffeur. Standing directly behind him were 2 uniformed Connecticut State Police officers. Their hands rested near their duty belts. They were not smiling. I stopped walking. The flow of passengers moved around me, bumping my shoulders, but I felt completely frozen. The man in the gray suit lowered the sign and stepped forward. He extended a hand. His grip was firm and dry. Jeremiah, he said, his voice deep and calm. My name is Thomas Mercer. I was your grandfather Walter Ashford's lawyer for 30 years. We need to talk. Right now. He led me to a small, windowless security office near the airport manager's desk. The 2 police officers stood outside the closed door. The room smelled of old coffee and floor wax. Thomas sat across from me at a cheap folding table. He opened a thick leather briefcase and pulled out a stack of documents, setting them down with deliberate precision. Your grandfather left you an inheritance, Thomas said flatly. But that is not why the police are outside. He slid a color photograph across the table. It was a surveillance picture of a man I had never seen before, a heavy-set guy with a thick neck and a tattoo creeping up from his collar. Next to the photo, Thomas placed a printed transcript of text messages. Your brother Dean is in a massive amount of debt, Thomas continued, his eyes never leaving mine. He owes very dangerous people a lot of money. The family trust document he tried to get you to sign yesterday, it was a fraud. And when you hesitated to sign it, Thomas tapped the printed text messages with his index finger. I leaned forward. The text was from Dean to a burner phone. It read, he is not signing. Make it look like an accident. Balcony, pool, whatever. Just make it clean. My lungs stopped working. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I looked at the next line on the paper. It was a group chat with my mother and father. Dean had updated them. Plan B is a go, Dean wrote. And then my mother's reply. The woman who had given birth to me. The woman who had cried on the phone 2 weeks ago, begging to see her youngest son again. Do what you have to do. Just keep us out of it. My father replied a minute later with a simple thumbs-up emoji. I stared at the paper. The black ink started to blur. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights grew louder, turning into a deafening roar in my ears. I felt Thomas's hand grip my shoulder, but he felt a million miles away. The edges of my vision turned dark, closing in like a tunnel. I tried to stand up, my chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. I could not feel my legs. The floor rushed up to meet me, and then everything went completely black. I woke up to the sharp smell of rubbing alcohol and the glaring white lights of the airport's emergency clinic. A paramedic was checking my pulse, his fingers cold against my wrist. Thomas Mercer was sitting in a plastic chair in the corner, holding a paper cup of water. You had a panic attack and passed out, the paramedic said, shining a small penlight into my eyes. Your blood pressure tanked. Take slow, deep breaths. I blinked against the harsh light. The memory of the text messages slammed back into my brain like a physical punch. Do what you have to do. Just keep us out of it. I closed my eyes, and suddenly I was not 32 years old anymore. I was 11. It was a Tuesday in November 21 years ago. I remembered the date because I had a permission slip for a middle school field trip to a science museum that needed a signature. I needed $3 and my mother's name on a piece of paper. I walked into the kitchen of our suburban home. The sky outside was dark, and heavy rain was violently lashing against the windows. My mother, Margaret, was standing by the kitchen island, holding the landline phone to her ear. Her face was a mask of cold annoyance. It's done, she said into the phone. He's leaving tonight. She hung up the receiver and turned to me. She did not look at me like a mother looks at her child. She looked at me the way you look at a stray dog that has wandered onto your clean porch. Pack your things, she said, her voice flat. I smiled, holding up the permission slip. I thought she meant packing my lunch for the field trip tomorrow. My father, Robert, walked into the kitchen. He did not look at me. He just grabbed his car keys and walked out the back door into the garage. My older brother, Dean, who was 14 at the time, leaned against the doorframe of the hallway. He had a smirk on his face. My mother grabbed a large, black plastic trash bag from under the sink. She threw it at my feet. Put your clothes in there. You are leaving. I did not understand. I started to cry, asking her what I did wrong, begging her to sign my permission slip. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging painfully into my skin, and dragged me toward the front door. Go, she said, opening the door to the freezing rain. Don't come back. She shoved me out onto the porch. The door slammed shut, and the deadbolt clicked. Dean stood at the front window watching me shiver in the cold, still smirking. I walked 3 miles in that freezing November rain. The black trash bag ripped halfway down Hebron Avenue, dragging my favorite jeans through the muddy puddles. My sneakers squished with every step. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. I had nowhere else to go but to my grandfather Walter Ashford's small house across town. When I finally knocked on his door, he opened it wearing his thick flannel shirt. He did not ask questions. He did not call my parents to yell at them. He just saw me soaking wet, dropped to his knees on the porch, wrapped his arms around me, and whispered, "You're home now, young man." For the next 7 years, Grandpa Walter was my entire world. He was a retired civil engineer who liked fixing old clocks and growing tomatoes. He made sure I did my homework. He taught me how to shave. He set up a college fund for me. He provided the only real warmth I ever knew. Often, I would see a man in a gray suit, Thomas Mercer, visiting the house carrying thick folders. Grandpa would always say it was just boring paperwork. When I was 18, just weeks before I left for college, Grandpa died peacefully in his sleep. I was devastated. I attended the funeral in a cheap, borrowed suit. My parents and Dean showed up to the church. They had not spoken a single word to me in 7 years. My mother wore a black dress and a silver cross necklace, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue, playing the role of the grieving daughter perfectly for the neighbors. My father shook hands with people he hardly knew. Dean walked right past me. As he bumped my shoulder, he leaned in and whispered, "Grandpa left everything to Mom. There's nothing for you here, loser." I didn't care about money. I only cared that the one person who loved me was in that casket. After the funeral, Thomas Mercer approached me in the parking lot and handed me a sealed envelope with a wax stamp. "Your grandfather asked me to give you this when the time is right," Thomas said. "Keep it safe. The time isn't now." I kept that envelope. I carried it through college. I carried it when I moved to San Francisco with $600 in my bank account. I carried it when I worked 80-hour weeks eating cheap ramen, coding until my eyes bled. I channeled every ounce of my rejection, every piece of my anger, into my work. I built a software platform called Hearthine, designed to connect kids aging out of the foster care system with volunteer mentors and housing resources. By the time I turned 30, venture capitalists took notice. The company exploded. Suddenly, my tech startup was valued at $47 million. I had a huge salary, stock options, and a life I built entirely with my own 2 hands. Nobody from my family knew where I was. I changed my phone number years ago. I thought the past was finally dead. But toxic families have a way of digging up graves when they smell money. Let me take you back to a few weeks before the Hilton Head trip to show you exactly how the trap was set. I was in my San Francisco apartment, reviewing financial reports for Hearthine, when my phone rang. It was an unknown Connecticut area code. Against my better judgment, I answered it. "Jeremiah." The voice was shaky, older, but unmistakable. My stomach dropped. It was my mother. I had not heard her voice since she threw me out in the rain 21 years ago. I did not speak. My hand gripped the edge of my desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "I know I don't deserve to call you," she sobbed. "But I went to the doctor yesterday. They found a mass. It's early-stage cancer. Put everything into perspective. I have been going to church, Jeremiah. I have changed. Your father and I just want to see you. We want to apologize for everything." My father got on the line. "Son," he said, his voice thick with fake emotion. "I failed you. I was a coward. Please, let us make it right." They begged me to join them on a family vacation they had booked in Hilton Head. Just 3 days. A chance to heal. I hung up the phone and immediately called my best friend, Grace. Grace was a no-nonsense emergency room nurse who knew my entire history. She listened to me recount the conversation. "It's a trap," Grace said bluntly. "People like that don't change, Jeremiah. They only come back when they need something. Do not go." Logically, I knew she was right, but there is a small, broken child inside all of us who just wants their parents to love them. I wanted to believe that facing mortality had truly changed my mother. I wanted to look them in the eye and hear them say the words, "I am sorry." So, I booked my own flight and a separate hotel room at the resort. When I arrived at the luxury beachfront hotel in Hilton Head, the illusion began immediately. My mother hugged me, crying dramatically in the lobby. My father patted my back, telling me how tall and handsome I had gotten. Then Dean arrived. He pulled up to the valet in a bright red, brand-new Porsche 911. He stepped out wearing a designer linen shirt and an expensive watch, grinning like he owned the hotel. Beside him was a stunning blonde woman named Amber, whom he introduced as his serious girlfriend. "Little brother," Dean shouted, pulling me into a stiff hug. "Look at you. Doing okay out there in California?" Dinner that night was an uncomfortable charade. My parents talked endlessly about their country club and their church friends. Dean dominated the conversation, bragging about his supposed massive success in commercial real estate. Amber laughed at every single joke he made, staring at him with wide, adoring eyes. Nobody mentioned the 21 years of silence. Nobody mentioned the trash bag in the rain. But I noticed the cracks in the facade. As the wine flowed, Dean's questions became sharper, more focused. "So, I read some article about your company, Hartheim," Dean said, swirling his expensive Cabernet. "Valued at what, 50 million? You must be pulling down a huge salary. Got any heavy investments? Family should pool their resources." I gave vague, non-committal answers. I told him my wealth was mostly on paper, tied up in company stock. Dean's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his eyes flashing with irritation. The next morning, at breakfast, the real agenda was finally placed on the table. Dean dropped a thick manila folder next to my coffee cup. "So, Mom and Dad are getting older," Dean said smoothly, buttering a piece of toast. "And I've been looking into Grandpa Walter's old estate. Turns out, things were never properly settled. Mom and Dad want me to manage everything moving forward to avoid massive tax hits. We had a lawyer draw up a family trust." He slid a stapled document toward me. "The Ashford-Frell Family Revocable Trust. Mom and Dad already signed. I just need your signature on the last page," Dean said casually. "It just consolidates all the family assets under my management. Just a formality. I am a CEO. I have spent years reading complex vendor contracts and venture capital term sheets. I skimmed the first 2 pages. It was not a simple consolidation. It was a blanket power of attorney disguised as a trust. If I signed it, I would be granting Dean full, irrevocable legal control over all my personal assets, bank accounts, and corporate holdings. "I need my legal team to review this," I said, sliding the document back across the table. Dean's friendly mask completely shattered. The muscles in his jaw locked. He slammed his hand flat on the table, rattling the silverware. "It's just a standard form, Jeremiah. Stop being so paranoid. Mom and Dad trust me. Why can't you?" "I don't sign anything without my lawyer," I replied calmly, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. Amber quickly looked down at her phone, typing furiously. My mother stared at her plate, suddenly refusing to make eye contact with me. My father cleared his throat loudly. "Let him read it, Dean," my father muttered. "He'll sign it tomorrow." I took my phone, snapped pictures of every single page of the document right there at the breakfast table, and emailed them to my corporate attorney in San Francisco. The tension at the table was suffocating. I excused myself, claiming I had a work call, and headed back to my room. The storm was gathering, and I could feel the electricity in the air. I paced the floor of my hotel room, waiting for my lawyer to call me back. The ocean view outside the window, which had looked so beautiful yesterday, now felt isolating. I was completely alone on this side of the country, surrounded by people who shared my DNA but felt like absolute strangers. 2 hours later, my lawyer called. "Jeremiah, do not sign a single page of that document." His voice was urgent through the speaker. "This isn't a family trust. It's a financial death warrant. It contains a sweeping power of attorney clause that basically hands over the keys to your entire life. If you sign this, your brother could legally drain your bank accounts, borrow against your Hartheim equity, and transfer titles." "Who the hell drafted this?" "I don't know," I said, rubbing my temples. "But my brother is pushing hard for it." "Walk away," my lawyer commanded. "Tell them no and get on a plane." I ended the call and sat on the edge of the bed. Why now? Why did my parents suddenly care about an estate that had been sitting untouched for over a decade? I needed water. I grabbed my keycard and stepped out into the carpeted hallway to head to the ice machine near the elevators. As I walked past my parents' suite, which was 2 doors down from mine, I heard voices. The door was not fully latched. It was cracked open just a sliver. I stopped. I held my breath and leaned closer to the heavy wooden door. "He's not stupid, Dean," my mother hissed. Her voice was not weak or sick. It was sharp and full of venom. "I told you to go slow. You pushed the paperwork too fast." "I don't have time to go slow," Dean snapped back. I could hear him pacing furiously inside the room. "The deadline is Friday. If I don't have the cash by Friday, they're gonna break my legs, Mom. Literally. They know where Amber lives." "Keep your voice down," my father warned. "We'll get him to sign it tonight at dinner. I'll tell him it's my dying wish or whatever. We just need to break his resistance." "And if he doesn't?" Dean asked, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "If he calls his fancy California lawyers and refuses? What then? Because I am not going down for this. I have a backup plan in place." "Just get the signature, Dean," my mother said coldly. I backed away from the door slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The cancer was a lie. The apology was a lie. The entire vacation was an elaborate stage play designed to steal my company to pay off Dean's massive debts. I hurried back to my room and locked the door, sliding the security chain into place. I pulled out my phone to book the next flight out of Savannah. That was when the screen lit up with the anonymous text message. "Fly home. Don't say anything to your parents and brother. Get out now." Then, a second message immediately followed. "There is a car waiting for you behind the hotel kitchen loading dock. Go down the service stairs. Now." I didn't know who was texting me, but I knew what I had just heard through the door. My brother was desperate, and desperate men do terrible things. I didn't bother packing my clothes. I grabbed my backpack with my electronics and passport. I turned off the lights in the room to make it look like I was asleep. I crept down the concrete service stairs, avoiding the main lobby and the security cameras. The air in the stairwell smelled of bleach and old garbage. When I pushed open the heavy metal exit door at the bottom, the humid night air hit me in the face. An unmarked black sedan was idling by the loading dock, its headlights off. The rear window rolled down an inch. "Jeremiah," the driver said quietly. "Get in." I hesitated for a fraction of a second, but staying at the resort felt like waiting for an executioner. I climbed into the back seat. The driver didn't say another word. He merged onto Highway 278, driving fast but smoothly toward the Savannah airport. I sat in the dark, watching the headlights of oncoming cars wash over the interior of the sedan. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Dean. "Hey bro, want to grab a drink at the hotel bar? Just you and me. Let's talk." I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I didn't reply. I turned my phone on silent. When I got to the airport, I used cash to buy a ticket on the first flight to Hartford, Connecticut. I sat in a hard plastic chair at the empty gate, staring at the dark runway. I felt like a fugitive. I texted Grace just before boarding. "Something is very wrong. I fled the hotel. I'm flying to Hartford. I'll call you when I land." Grace replied instantly, "Thank God. Call me the second you touch down." The flight took off just as the sun was starting to peek over the horizon. I looked out the window at the Atlantic Ocean below, feeling a deep, hollow emptiness in my chest. I had spent 21 years hoping that maybe, just maybe, my family had made a mistake. That they actually loved me. But the truth was far uglier. I just didn't realize how ugly it truly was until I landed in Hartford, walked into that security office, and saw Thomas Mercer holding the printout of Dean's text messages. The harsh fluorescent lights of the airport security office brought me back to reality. I was sitting in the plastic chair, the paramedic packing up his blood pressure cuff. My hands were shaking so violently I had to press them flat against my thighs to make them stop. Thomas Mercer, my grandfather's lawyer, sat across from me. Next to him was a woman who had quietly entered the room while I was passed out. She wore a sharp black blazer and had the cold, calculating eyes of a predator. "Jeremiah," Thomas said gently, "this is Rachel Dunn. She is a private investigator. I hired her months ago." Rachel nodded curtly. She opened a sleek laptop and turned the screen toward me. Your brother Dean is not a successful real estate developer, Rachel stated, her voice devoid of any emotion. He is a severe gambling addict. That Porsche he drove? Rented. His luxury apartment? 3 months behind on rent. He owes a local syndicate $340,000. They gave him until Friday to pay, or they promised to put him in a wheelchair. I stared at the screen, which displayed copies of Dean's horrific bank statements and overdue loan notices. 6 months ago, Thomas intervened. Dean broke into your late grandfather's house looking for anything of value to sell. He found a draft copy of Walter's will in an old desk. That is what triggered this entire nightmare. Thomas reached into his briefcase and pulled out the thick document with the wax seal, the one he had handed me at the funeral 14 years ago, the one I had never opened. He broke the seal and laid the heavy parchment paper on the table. Your grandfather Walter Ashford left you everything, Thomas said. His house, his investments, his savings. The total liquid value is roughly $2.8 million. He specifically disinherited your mother and your brother. But the will had a stipulation. You could not inherit the money until you turned 32. Your grandfather knew your mother's greed. He wanted you to be an established adult, capable of defending yourself, before the money became yours. The room spun slightly. $2.8 million. Grandpa had made me a millionaire, and my family had found out. Dean told your parents about the will, Rachel continued. They hatched the cancer story to lure you to South Carolina, where you had no local connections and no legal counsel. The plan was to trick you into signing the power of attorney, allowing Dean to empty the $2.8 million trust to pay his debts and keep the rest. But I didn't sign, I whispered, my voice hoarse. No, you didn't, Rachel said. She clicked a button on her laptop, pulling up the surveillance photo of the heavyset man with the neck tattoo. This is Victor. He has 2 prior convictions for aggravated assault. Dean hired him. When you refused to sign the document at breakfast, Dean sent Victor your room number and a photo of your passport to identify you. How did Dean get a photo of my passport? I asked, nausea rising in my throat. Amber, Rachel said bluntly. Dean's girlfriend. She isn't his girlfriend. She's Victor's associate. She went through your backpack while you were at the hotel bar the first night. She sent the photos to Victor. Rachel handed me the printed transcript of the text messages again. The ones I had seen right before I fainted. Read them, she commanded. I forced my eyes to focus on the black ink. Dean, he is not signing. Make it look like an accident. Balcony, pool, whatever. Just make it clean. Victor. Price goes up if it has to look like an accident. $50K. Dean, just get it done tonight. Then, the group chat with my parents. Dean, plan B is a go. Mom. Do what you have to do. Just keep us out of it. Dad. Thumbs up. My jaw clamped shut so hard my teeth ground together. A vein throbbed violently at my temple. The sadness, the longing for a family, the hurt little boy who had walked in the rain. All of it evaporated in a single second. It was replaced by a white-hot, blinding rage. They didn't just hate me. They viewed me as livestock. A piggy bank they were willing to slaughter to save their golden child. My own mother gave the green light to have me pushed off a balcony. I slammed my fist down on the metal table. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the small room. Where is Dean? I demanded, my voice low and vibrating with absolute fury. At this exact moment, Thomas said, checking his gold wristwatch, the South Carolina State Police are kicking down the door of his hotel room. Victor was arrested an hour ago in the hotel parking lot. He rolled on Dean immediately to save himself. I stood up, knocking the chair backward. And my parents? The police are on their way to their house in Glastonbury right now, Rachel said, closing her laptop. They won't be charged with conspiracy to commit murder today. The text message is legally ambiguous enough for a defense lawyer to stall. But we are going to destroy them in probate court. We are going to take everything. I looked at Thomas. The fear was completely gone. I want to press every single charge, I said coldly. I want to freeze every asset. I want them to burn. Thomas allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. Let's go to court, Jeremiah. The next 48 hours moved with the brutal efficiency of a military operation. Dean was arrested in Hilton Head. The police dragged him out of the resort lobby in handcuffs, crying and screaming that it was a misunderstanding. He was denied bail. The charge was criminal solicitation of murder. Amber vanished before the police could grab her, disappearing back into the criminal underworld. Back in Connecticut, 2 state troopers knocked on my parents' front door. They didn't have a warrant for arrest, but they had a warrant to seize their cell phones as evidence in Dean's case. I was sitting in Thomas Mercer's law office when my burner phone, which Thomas had insisted I use, rang. It was my mother. Thomas nodded, turning on an audio recorder on the desk. I answered it and put it on speaker. Jeremiah, my mother shrieked. Her voice was pure, unfiltered panic. What have you done? The police were just here. They took our phones. They say Dean is in jail in South Carolina. You have to drop these absurd charges right now. I didn't press the criminal charges, Margaret, I said, using her first name for the first time in my life. The state of South Carolina did, because your son hired a hitman to kill me. That is a lie, my father yelled in the background. Dean would never do that. You set him up because you're jealous of him. You've always been a malicious, ungrateful brat. I gripped the edge of Thomas's desk, my knuckles white. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just leaned into the phone and spoke with absolute, chilling clarity. I read your text messages, I said. Dead silence fell over the line. Do what you have to do. Just keep us out of it. I quoted, letting the words hang in the air. You signed my death warrant to pay off his gambling debts. I have the screenshots, Margaret. The police have the screenshots. Do not ever call this number again. The next time you see me, it will be in a courtroom. I hung up and blocked the number. 2 weeks later, we faced off in the Hartford probate court. My parents had hired an expensive defense attorney to challenge Grandpa Walter's will. Their strategy was despicable. They claimed that Grandpa Walter was suffering from dementia and that Thomas Mercer had manipulated him into signing the will. The courtroom was packed. My parents had mobilized their church group and country club friends, filling the benches to play the role of the tragic, victimized parents. My mother wore her usual black dress and silver cross, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. My father sat stiffly in his suit, glaring at me from across the aisle. Their lawyer stood up and delivered a passionate speech about how Grandpa Walter was confused and isolated in his final years, and how he never would have intentionally cut out his loving daughter and eldest grandson. When it was Thomas's turn, he didn't give a speech. He just started dropping bombs. First, Thomas submitted a sworn psychiatric evaluation of Grandpa Walter, dated 2 days before he signed the will. The doctor declared him in the top 1% of cognitive function for his age. Completely lucid. My parents' lawyer paled. Then Thomas called our star witness, Mrs. Patricia Boyd. She was a 70-year-old woman who had lived 3 houses down from my parents 21 years ago. Mrs. Boyd took the stand, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked directly at my mother, her expression filled with disgust. Mrs. Boyd, Thomas asked, do you recall the night of November 14th? I do, Mrs. Boyd said clearly into the microphone. It was pouring rain. I looked out my kitchen window and saw Margaret dragging young Jeremiah out onto the porch by his arm. She threw a garbage bag at him and locked the door. He was just a little boy. I watched him walk down the street in the freezing rain. Murmurs erupted in the courtroom. My mother's church friends gasped, whispering furiously to each other. My mother's face turned the color of ash. What did you do next, Mrs. Boyd? Thomas asked. I called the police, she replied. An officer arrived an hour later. I saw him talking to Margaret on her porch. Margaret lied to his face. She told the officer that Jeremiah was an unruly teenager who had voluntarily run away to a friend's house and that she was handling it. The officer left. I have lived with the guilt of not pushing it further every single day. Thomas submitted the original 911 call transcript and the police report from that night, which Grandpa Walter had somehow obtained and kept in his files for 2 decades. The judge slammed his gavel. He didn't even need to deliberate. He validated the will immediately, granting me sole ownership of the entire $2.8 million estate, and officially referred the text message evidence to the state prosecutor to investigate my parents for criminal conspiracy. As the court adjourned, my mother's church friends physically backed away from her in the aisle. Her entire social circle, her pristine reputation, crumbled to dust in front of her eyes. I walked past their table. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother stared at the floor, her hands trembling. "You got what you wanted," she whispered bitterly. "No," I replied, not breaking my stride. "I got what I survived." 6 months passed. The storm finally broke, leaving a clear, bright sky in its wake. Dean took a plea deal to avoid a full trial. He pleaded guilty to criminal solicitation and was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Victor, the hitman, got 12 years. My parents managed to avoid prison because their high-priced lawyer argued the text message could have meant stealing the money rather than murdering him. But they did not escape punishment. The local newspaper got hold of the probate court transcripts. The story of the wealthy, church-going couple who threw their 11-year-old out in the rain and later endorsed his murder became front-page news. My father was fired from his executive job. My mother was asked to leave her church. Bankrupted by legal fees and crushed by public humiliation, they were forced to sell their beautiful suburban house and move to a tiny, run-down apartment in Florida. I didn't gloat. I didn't care. They were ghosts to me now. I took the $2.8 million inheritance and funneled every single penny of it into my company, Hartheim, specifically launching a new physical initiative. I kept Grandpa Walter's house in Glastonbury. I couldn't bear to sell the only place I had ever felt safe. Instead, I hired a crew of contractors to renovate it. We knocked down walls, added bedrooms, updated the plumbing, and transformed the quiet little property into a state-of-the-art transitional living facility. We called it Ashford Nest. It was designed to house 6 teenagers who were aging out of the foster care system, providing them with free room and board, mentorship, and a college fund, so they would never end up walking in the rain with a garbage bag. Grace, my best friend, moved down from Boston to become the facility's lead medical advisor. Even Mrs. Boyd, the neighbor who testified, volunteered to cook dinners for the kids 3 nights a week to make up for her past silence. One Sunday afternoon, while the contractors were finishing the paint job in the living room, I was up in the attic clearing out the last of Grandpa Walter's old cardboard boxes. I found a heavy, taped-up manila envelope shoved way in the back, behind his old engineering textbooks. Written on the front in his neat handwriting was, "For Jeremiah, when he understands." I sat on the dusty floorboards and cut the tape with a pocket knife. Inside was a stack of legal documents. I pulled them out and began to read. My breath hitched in my throat. They were custody petitions. Official filings submitted to the Connecticut Superior Court. Petition for legal guardianship of a minor child. There wasn't just one. There were 17 of them, dating all the way back to the year I was thrown out and continuing every single year until I turned 18. 17 times my grandfather had walked into a courthouse and legally fought to adopt me. And 17 times there was an attached response from my parents' lawyers. My mother had aggressively contested every single petition. She lied in sworn affidavits, claiming Grandpa Walter was medically unfit, that he was an alcoholic, that his house was a danger zone. She threatened to have him arrested for kidnapping if he didn't drop the suits. She used her wealth and status to crush an old man's legal attempts to save his grandson. Grandpa Walter had never told me. He had never burdened me with the legal war he was fighting in the shadows. He just quietly protected me, absorbing the legal blows, making sure I had food on the table and a roof over my head, acting as a shield so I could focus on my grades and my future. I sat alone in the attic, holding those papers, and cried. I wept for the old man who loved me enough to fight for me 17 times in a rigged system. I wept for the little boy who thought he was an unwanted burden. But for the first time in my life, they were not tears of pain. They were tears of profound, overwhelming gratitude. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, carefully placed the documents back into the envelope, and carried them downstairs. I framed the top petition and hung it in my new office at Ashford Nest, a daily reminder of what true, unconditional love actually looks like. A year later, Ashford Nest was officially open and full of life. The house that used to be quiet was now filled with the sound of teenagers arguing over video games, the smell of Mrs. Boyd's famous lasagna baking in the oven, and the chaotic, beautiful energy of healing. It was a crisp autumn afternoon. I was standing on the front porch, leaning against the wooden railing, holding a mug of black coffee just like Grandpa used to do. A silver sedan slowly pulled up to the curb across the street and put it in park. The driver's side door opened, and a woman stepped out. It was my mother, Margaret. She looked 10 years older. Her expensive highlights had faded to a dull gray. She wore a cheap beige coat, and her shoulders were slumped. She didn't look like the terrifying tyrant who had ruled my childhood. She just looked pathetic, broken, and small. She stood on the sidewalk, looking across the street at the house. She saw me standing on the porch. She didn't wave. She didn't shout. She just took a hesitant step forward, stopping at the edge of the pavement. "Jeremiah," she called out, her voice barely carrying over the breeze. "I read about the house in the news. What you did with the money." I didn't answer. I just watched her. "Your father left me," she said, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "He blamed me for the trial. Dean won't even speak to me when I call the prison. I have no one." She took another step, her foot touching the asphalt of the street. "Please," she choked out, tears finally spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. "Can I just come inside? Just for 5 minutes. I just want to see what you built. I just want to sit with my son." I looked at her. I felt the weight of 21 years of trauma pressing against my chest. I thought about the text message she sent giving the hitman permission to kill me. I thought about the 17 custody petitions she destroyed. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a profound, absolute emptiness toward her. "No," I said, my voice echoing clearly across the quiet street. Her face crumbled. "Jeremiah, please. I'm your mother." "My mother died a long time ago," I replied evenly. "This house is for people who protect children, not people who throw them away. Do not come back here." I turned around, opened the heavy oak front door, walked inside, and shut it firmly behind me, locking the deadbolt. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a few more minutes before she finally got back into her car and drove away, disappearing from my life forever. Inside the house, a 16-year-old girl named Lily came bounding down the stairs, carrying a college prep book. She had been abandoned by her family when she was 14. She looked at me, tilting her head. "Who was that out there?" Lily asked. I looked at the empty street through the glass, then smiled at Lily. "Nobody," I said. "Just a ghost. Have you finished your math homework?" "Yeah," Lily beamed. "Grace said if I finish early, we can order pizza for dinner." "Then pizza it is," I laughed, walking with her toward the kitchen. My journey didn't end with a magical reconciliation. It ended with the cold, hard truth that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones you have to walk away from to survive. I spent my whole life looking for a family to accept me, only to realize that Grandpa Walter had already given me the tools to build one myself. Blood does not make you family. Loyalty, protection, and unconditional choice make you family. I am Jeremiah. I was thrown out in the rain at 11 years old, and today I make sure no one else has to walk that road alone. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever faced a similar situation where you had to set boundaries with your own loved ones? Please share your story in the comments, and don't forget to like or subscribe so you don't miss out on future content.